Find me the man and I'll find you the crime. Well, Manhattan's officially running a kangaroo court. Let's get into it.
Jury selection is underway in the hush money case against former President Donald Trump, who has now become the first former U.S. president and the first leading presidential candidate to ever stand trial on criminal charges. The case is being brought 8 years after it allegedly happened and 7 months before the 2024 election. And many legal analysts are arguing that it's a case that Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg never should have pursued.
I refuse to indulge the fiction that this is an episode of the criminal justice system doing justice.
I mean this very sincerely. I am convinced that the New York justice system is determined to crush Donald Trump, and they'll do whatever it takes, including abusing the law. No one really understands what the underlying crime is because it's not in the indictment.
There's not more to it. There's not an incredible new set of facts that we didn't know about publicly. It's really the facts of this case as they have existed for basically almost 7 years.
That will play immediately into the politics of this, that there was nothing new, that there was not a new surprising fact pattern.
In America, we're supposed to have a free and fair justice system, and one of the critical components of that is to know what you're being charged with. The accused has the right to know what they're being accused of, right? That's a hallmark of the Sixth Amendment in the Constitution, something we're all guaranteed to have.
This is a highly partisan, highly political process. We have a progressive prosecutor who has taken a crime that he wouldn't prosecute against anyone conceivably except Donald Trump. He would never bring this misdemeanor against anyone. He's brought it against Trump. It's time barred. He's bringing it against Trump anyway. He's trying to dress it up into a felony by invoking federal law that he doesn't have any jurisdiction to prosecute. And that's how we land in court. That's not the criminal justice system. That's a political persecution.
It's another example of a New York prosecution going after Trump where there's no victim.
How do you sort of legality-wise, but also on the optics of it, then sort of bump this up from misdemeanor to felony when you've downgraded 52% of felonies and won't prosecute many of the violent crimes?
Down here on planet Earth, we shouldn't be regarding Alvin Bragg as a law enforcement official. We should be regarding him as what he is, which is an elected progressive Democrat.
Looking at this, I just assume, okay, well, this whole thing really is rigged.
It's ridiculous.
If his name were John Smith, Melvin Bragg would not be bringing this case. And so I think that's a real political problem.
The bigger question is, can he get a fair trial in New York?
Well, that is a huge question.
This is political persecution. This is a persecution like never before. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And again, it's a case that should have never been brought. It's an assault on America.
And I'm back with George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley. And Jonathan, I want to get your take on what's most important for us to understand about all of these trials to come and tomorrow's jury selection for Donald Trump. And while you're telling us, I'm going to put up this letter. This is from Stormy Daniels that President Trump posted. I know you've seen this. It says, Stormy Daniels writes, the fact of the matter is that each party to this alleged affair denied its existence in 2006, 2011, 2016, 2017, and now again in 2018. I'm not denying this affair because I was paid hush money. I'm denying the affair because it never happened, writes Stormy Daniels. Sir.
Yeah, everything about this case is, in my view, legally absurd. You know, this case is basically a state misdemeanor that had run out on the statute of limitations. And Bragg was forced, after he declined for a long time to bring this charge, to do so. His predecessor rejected it. And so they took a dead misdemeanor and bootstrapped it into effectively trying a federal crime. But the federal crime here under election law was rejected by the Department of Justice. They didn't feel that this should be charged. So you have this crazy case that's going to go forward, and it's going to turn on the testimony of people like Michael Cohen. And Michael Cohen just recently had a judge call him a serial perjurer. Wow. And he's going to appear as the center of this case.
Unbelievable. Jonathan, great to see you this morning. Thanks very much. Professor Jonathan Turley.
Bill Hemmer, so much
Sounds
to
pretty
unpack
simple,
here.
huh?
Yeah. All right, walk us through what we need to know. What stands out to you?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but here's what I've learned. Misdemeanors elevated to felonies, which is what Turley's talking about there. There's a statute of limitations that expired for this case. Did you know that?
Yes.
It was extended by a year because of COVID rules. Now, I don't know. We live in New York, right? Mm-hmm. Can you name a case in New York where that has applied? I don't know. There are parking tickets out there, or speeding tickets, maybe. Andy McCarthy, whose opinion I trust thoroughly, he said to Dana and me earlier today, he said, as a legal hallmark in America, the accused must know what they're accused of. Remember this elevated felony? He was acting to commit another crime. And what Turley says is right. The Department of Justice passed, and so did the Southern District of New York. The Southern District of New York had a chance to go after Donald Trump, and they passed. I mean, what does that tell you? I don't know necessarily if Bragg had to take this case. He could have waved it right through. Do you know what Donald Trump, you know what his voting percentage was in 2016 and 2020? You know it, Carly? 2016 was what?
10%.
Yeah, and 2020 it was?
12%.
All right, so I asked this question. Has Bragg brought a case that he can win? I don't know, but if he gets the right jury, there's a chance.
My answer to that, my bet, Harris, is the answer is no. But when we talk about that jury, part of the motions this morning that the judge assessed was a motion on behalf of the jury and the jury pool, right? And saying essentially, how are we going to get a fair jury here? The judge responded, this is the most exhaustive questionnaire he's ever seen, he says. He says at the end, there'll be no doubt how the jurors feel about Trump. But at the end of the day, as you saw him standing there before the cameras, he's essentially saying, look, Americans, I'm standing for you.
Well, it's interesting. So you brought up the 12%, and I was reading an op-ed this morning that said that if the jury is made up of 12% of people who even have the thought that there might be reasonable doubt, whether they support Trump or not, that's a hung jury. So it is interesting, right, that 12% number, or any percentage really. What you talked about, though, the two layers of this, Andrew Cherkowski was just talking about on my show last hour. Defraud the books. Did he do that? This is what the prosecution has to prove. And then what Bill Hemmer just said, specific intent to commit a crime. In doing that, that's a high bar. That's why you bring in the salaciousness of Karen McDougal, who says she had a 10-month-long, hot, steamy affair with Donald Trump and was paid by American media $150,000 to take her story and then kill her story, allegedly, but she got that money. So that's why you bring that up in a case that has nothing to do with any of that. Because you're going to have to prove all these other things. One bottom line for Donald Trump today, this is the weakest of the cases. So no matter how he goes forward, it is rather uphill. And I liked what he said earlier. I like when any defendant talks this way. It is my honor. It's a pleasure to be here. Respecting the court. I've heard you talk about that and the importance of doing that when you've got a wall against you.
Right, and that he consistently does. Carly, let's dive into this. Let's do brass tacks here, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about, the right to know what you're accused of, the specific intent for the underlying crime, the argument here is, what crime are you talking about?
Yeah.
You never talked about it in the indictment. You still haven't told me. And if it's federal law, which we think that's what you're saying, then you have no jurisdiction over it, Alvin Bragg, let alone it ran in the statute of limitations.
Yeah.
So that's why my money is that this is going to be thrown out, because what fair, impartial, normal-minded American will sit in front of that and say, yes, this rises to the level of 8 felonies. It frankly doesn't. It should have been tossed out years ago. But unfortunately, we've already spent millions as taxpayers paying for this.
Yeah, there is so much to talk about when it comes to this case. I remember a year ago when Alvin Bragg brought these charges down, the first time we heard 34 felony counts for falsifying business records. I remember thinking, how do you charge somebody for allegedly mislabeling something in your own personal bookkeeping? And I was talking to Katie Cherkowski about that, great lawyer who also appears on Fox News, and she was saying that's going to be a real big problem for prosecutors, because they're going to have to prove, get this, they're going to have to prove that Trump or whoever, when they physically wrote in the logs, we are paying Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, for his legal services, that they did that with criminal intent. How are they going to prove that when Trump never even knew that these records were going to be looked at by anybody? And the only reason Alvin Bragg has them is because Michael Cohen's house got raided. So I know we got to roll, and I'll wrap this up here. But, I mean, this is far from an open and shut case.
But what else would you call it? You're getting legal services.
Right.
Isn't that what you would put in the ledger?
And I'll tell you what the judge called Michael Cohen. He called him a serial perjurer, Rebecca, and yet he is supposedly the linchpin upon which this whole case rests, and he doesn't have a gag order, so he's been running his mouth all around town and all over media, telling exactly what he thinks under no oath, so there's no threat of perjurer charges for this person that apparently is the star witness for New York Manhattan DA.
Look, I got a great way to wrap this up here. Rich Lowry, this was commended by Andy McCarthy, so I also respect him. And so check this out. Rich Lowry said, speaking about Bragg, lesser prosecutors would have been daunted by the prospect of creating a national melodrama and norm-breaking prosecution of a former president over what is in essence a misdemeanor business records charge. I want that norm-breaking point. I want to pull that thread. Donald Trump has regularly been accused of this president who is norm-breaking, you know, whenever he was president. But here we have him, to Harris's point, respecting the court, walking in, respecting what the court's going to do, respecting the institution, while you have the prosecutor doing all of the norm-breaking. Quite the contrast.
Yeah.
Hey, is this mic on?